Hi, I'm Erica Lewandowski, and this is my father, Robert Lewandowski. Say hi.
Hi.
We are going to talk about the traditions in Baltimore, Maryland, which is where my dad grew up. So, how was growing up Baltimore for you? Like, what would you say was the most, special thing about growing up in Baltimore? And we'll talk about different parts of that.
Well, I think I've always been very proud to have grown up there, and it's a city that has sometimes a mixed reputation nationally, but I think most people that grew up there, we sort of have this, this mentality of us against the world a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, it's an old city, and it has its quote better areas and a little less safe areas, can we say?
That's like any city, though.
No, it is, and it's like any city, and it's like any. And Baltimore is one of those old eastern cities. It's been around since colonial days. It has a ton of history, obviously. But just always I've always been proud to have grown up there. Not that I've always been proud of every single thing that has come out of there, but I always tell people where I'm from, and I'm proud to tell them that.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's not, I guess, how you're raised, but it's also it's kind of how the community is also. And it shows itself in a bunch of different ways. Like, people do express the fact that, maybe this isn't the best place in the world, but it's ours, and and we care about it, and and I haven't lived there since 1990, but I still feel exactly the same way, and I go there as much as I can, which isn't as much as I'd like to. But I still completely connected, obviously through family, and I go on, the Baltimore Sun is the main newspaper there, and I still regularly go to that, except, of course, they're charging for their subscriptions now, so maybe once in a while I don't, I walk away from them for a little while, but anyway, no, I still do all that, and I'm like a big sports fan of the teams, and have always been, and that's a tradition also. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of different areas you can talk about as far as being proud of coming from a certain place, and what makes it a special place.
Okay. So, I think first we're going to talk about how you refer to it as a tough city. What do you mean by that?
Don't sugarcoat it. It has a high murder rate.
Yep.
It has a very high murder rate. Some of these things have been documented on TV, with actually a lot of reality. Mm-hmm. It hasn't been sensationalized. It's just been kind of they've gotten a lot of the ideas from some of these shows from actually police files and stuff, and it's been, and the police themselves have said how some of these shows have been very realistic, which when you were very young, your mother and I watched Homicide, Life in the Street, which was by David Simon, who was actually my boss at the University of Maryland newspaper, but it was filmed in Baltimore, and it took advantage of a lot of Maryland actors and stuff, and it was on location, and it was very realistic, and they actually did go into the files and pull real cases and develop stories that way, and develop the characters really well, and it was a very gritty type show. And then he went on to make a show called The Wire that even got more down and dirty with kind of that side. Well, there's the whole thing of the balance between what the police are trying to do and what law and order is trying to do, and then what the people that are disenfranchised in the inner city, and they're trying to do what they think they have to do, and like anywhere else, there's good people and bad people.
Yeah, of course.
But so no, it is a tough city. It's got a heroin problem.
It's the heroin capital of the world.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, I've heard things like that, and just the problem, racial problems. I mean, when I was a little boy, the city burned to not the whole city, but a good section, different sections of the city burned to the ground after Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then there was the Freddie Gray stuff just last spring, very recent, and so there's a lot of issues, a lot of people that have felt left behind, and then at the same time you have this great other part of the city. I hate to say other part, but just a different. Younger people moving back to the city, trying to make it better, and other people, business people, making it better and trying to improve the whole climate. And it's definitely, since I was a kid, the national reputation has gone way, 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 way up because of things they've done to market themselves, and the Inner Harbor area, and the stadium complexes, and the museums, and the history and everything else, and I don't know, I'm rambling.
That's fine.
Oh, you said tough city, and there I am talking about
I mean,
the Inner Harbor, having lunch down at the Inner Harbor.
Oh,
it is a tough city,
great.
though.
Yeah.
It's a tough city.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about sports. Let's talk about the tradition of sports in Baltimore, and you can start wherever you want with that. You can start with the Orioles or the Baltimore Colts. Start with whatever you want.
When I was growing up, the Colts were king. They were... there was a love affair with the Colts. And it was kind of unique because a lot of the players, I would say most of them, came in as a unit kind of young and grew up in the city, and it was a different football environment then because they didn't just leave for free agency. There was no free agency, so they really stuck around, and they didn't make the money that they do now, and most of them had to have second jobs in the off seasons, and a lot of them worked regular jobs, started businesses, but they were in the community. I give the players now a lot of credit for what they do, but these guys literally were almost like neighbors at times. When I was born just south of the city, and my parents grew up just south of the city, literally just across the river, and I think I just kind of lost my thought there on that for a second. I'm sorry. Well, just back to the sports end of it. I really did just lose my thought. I was going somewhere with that.
That's
but
okay.
I'm sorry. I'm a little bit tired. They fell in love with the Colts, and the players, like I said, lived in the communities a lot. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I'm sorry. After we moved from Brooklyn, which is just south, it's actually Brooklyn Park, south of the city. Both of my parents grew up there. My grandparents lived there. Other relatives obviously live there. And we moved to Timonium, and on our street, 3 doors down, was the house of an Orioles relief pitcher. And he wasn't there very long. I don't know what, maybe it was because he got traded or he switched teams, but just a year or two after we moved in there, he was gone, and then this really nice old lady moved in there. But, yeah, so they were really part of the community. And then I don't remember their first success. I wasn't born quite yet. But, again, entertainment, there's a movie called Diner by Barry Levinson, who is an award-winning director. You're going to have to look up his biography to... I think didn't Barry Levinson, wasn't he involved with Apollo 13? But Barry Levinson's done a lot of movies, but this was Diner, and it was basically about the love affair between the Colts and people in Baltimore in the late 50s. They won back-to-back NFL championships. And then throughout the 60s, they were one of those teams that was like a power all through the decade, into the next decade, into the beginning of the next decade. Always there. They played for a championship in the mid-60s, and they lost to the Cleveland Browns, which was Cleveland's last football world championship that long ago. But the Colts would have even been... Like, the Colts would have been more compared to the Packers of the 60s if they had just won that one more championship there. Mm-hmm. But they won back-to-back championships, lost the championship in the mid-60s. We're in the 69 Super Bowl, which was Super Bowl III, which is one of the most famous Super Bowl games. It's when Joe Namath guaranteed the win, and he got it, and the Colts were like the biggest champions ever upset in that game. But then they came back and they won a Super Bowl like 2 years later, and they were just like legendary by that point. And then they had a second resurgence in the mid-70s, and everybody, all the feeling of loving the Colts came back, because they did go through a down period when their ownership changed, and they basically, the owner got rid of all the old heroes, including Johnny Unitas, who played in San Diego for part of one season. And so, yeah, they had a run there, and everybody loved it. And then, with success, they started going downhill a little bit, and they ended up moving to Indianapolis, and that like broke everybody's heart big time.
In the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. It's a pretty famous story, and the Mayflower moving vans, and nobody could really believe that it was really happening. They just couldn't fathom it. And our mayor at the time, who was like one of the great mayors we ever had, Mayor Schaefer, he tried to negotiate to keep them here, and it ended up he took them. This guy took them away, and so then when the Ravens finally came, we had mixed feelings at first, but obviously since we've embraced them, like, big time, they won 2 Super Bowls. And I haven't even said anything about the Orioles yet.
That's okay. Speaking of Johnny Unitas, before we move on to the Orioles and their traditions and whatnot, tell me a little bit about him and the fact that we have a statue outside of M&T Bank of him now, and everyone likes to rub his toe before a game. Let's talk about that tradition.
Boy, you're so good at interviewing. Huh? You're on the other end. I was on the other end of this years ago with my journalism degree.
I want to mention that he's a big sports hero in Baltimore, and he was for the longest time one of the only people that had a sports statue outside of M&T Bank Stadium.
He's probably the number one sports legend, debatably, along with one or two other people. But,
I would agree.
But yeah, and Johnny Unitas he was one of those guys. He lived in the community, started various businesses, and I'm like so kind of amazed to say that Johnny Unitas was my first boss, and I worked in his restaurant in I guess that would be the fringes of Towson, right there. It wasn't too far from where we were living, and that was my first job when I was 16, and I met him on many occasions, and it was kind of, his restaurant was like, you walked in there, and it was almost like stepping back into the late 50s or something, and there was giant murals on the wall of these close-ups of them, on the field, in the locker room, that used to like